how are you? I mean, you have tuned into what I'm thinking is going to be one of the best shows we've ever had. I'm so excited to be in movie music heaven, especially horror music heaven, with our special guest, Christopher Young. Now, Christopher has just had his soundtrack of 50 States of Fright, and I want to go colon Michigan. We'll talk about that in a second. It was just released, and it was from a series that ran early last year, early 2020, in case you're watching this in the next century. And now he's working on some new stuff. We're going to talk about 50 states, maybe talk about the new stuff, and then we're going to really talk about the real Christopher Young. And so let's not wait around. I'd like to introduce composer master Christopher Young.
Thank you, Del. Thank you, my friend. It's great to be here with you. You know how much I adore you. Dark Delicacies is like heaven around the corner for me and for so many people. Thank you for continuing to have it available to all of us kooks who are addicted to all things dark. You know,
and your music always helped with that too.
Well, I appreciate that. You know, it's interesting.
Tell me a little bit about the 50 States of Fright before we go into the easy stuff here. It was a TV series, but were they going to do all 50 states?
Yeah, it was a Quibi thing that was the idea. It was Sam Raimi who directed the episode that I did called The Golden Arm, which dealt specifically with an urban legend springing from his home state, which was Michigan. The idea that they were going to do not every single state, but selected states that had urban legends that were connected to that state that meant something to the director, a director who was born in that state. And that was the idea. It was going to be an ongoing Twilight Zone, I guess, compilation of short stories. Yeah, I guess that makes sense, or Tales from the Crypt kind of thing.
Right, an anthology kind of show.
Anthology, thank you, an anthology concept, yes.
Yeah, Sam is an old Michigan State University guy, and you're a Texas, right? Didn't you go to the university in?
Oh, I went to University of North Texas, but I'm a New Jersey guy, you know, and of course the great urban legend from New Jersey would have been the Jersey Devil.
Right.
You know, I don't know.
He's still a legend.
Oh, he's still a legend, and people still claim they see him. They've seen him. They see him. So yes, New Jersey's got a home run of a urban legend connected to it.
Yeah,
but this was a great story that I loved it. I remember sitting down with Sam and Bob Morawski, his picture editor, and watching it for the first time. And it was like, I remember turning to Sam and I said, "Oh my God, Sam, this is insane. It's absolutely wonderful." And I just had the feeling that this was going to reignite, you know, his presence as a director again, you know. So I was thrilled.
He's got a new movie out there playing at the drive-ins and stuff right now too. I don't remember the name of it, but he's finally got a new horror film out.
Oh, he does? Okay, there you go. Yeah. All right.
So this was a year ago that you did this.
Was it that long ago? My God.
It was early 2020. I think the biggest problem is most of us haven't seen it because it was on Quibi. Is that?
That is right. It's on Quibi.
That's one of those mini networks that have sprung up. Is that what it is?
Well, you know what Quibi was? It was the cell phone concept of entertainment, something you could take in small doses on the road with you and not have to worry about sitting in front of a large screen at home. I guess I don't know enough about it. I really don't.
I'm too old school, I guess.
Yes, and it didn't catch, I guess, and there it ended. But you know, the episode that I worked on, it was as tight and as professional and it was a home run. Just unfortunately, the as I said, as we pointed out, Quibi disintegrated. And
Oh, is it no longer?
No, it's no longer. I think Quibi is gone. So I don't know what's going to happen to the material that appeared on Quibi, but this is completely unavailable. Did you try to find it? I haven't tried to find it, but it's gone bye-bye.
But what is available is your soundtrack.
The soundtrack is about, yes, it's just come out, yes. And
that's great.
Yes, now, I'm absolutely thrilled.
Of course, they can get it from Dark Delicacies, but where else can they get it? Can they get it direct from you? Because I don't care so much that they buy it from us, but that they buy it.
You know, I'm not exactly sure. Where else can we get this thing? I'm not exactly sure exactly where you can.
Do you have a website that you sell it on?
I do not. I do not. I do not. Let's get it from you for the time being.
All right. We'll cover in the meantime.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Let's go back to just a little bit to the beginning of you. And you were actually a jazz drummer. Did I get that right?
That is absolutely right. But before that, I was a wannabe rock and roller. I mean, not wannabe. I was trying to become a star rock, like rock star rock and roller, and had fallen madly in love with everything having to do with, 60s rock and roll, the Byrds, the Beach Boys, and the Beatles, and of course, I'm very, very young, but I remember seeing the Beatles on the Ed Sullivan Show and just wanted so badly to have been old enough and English, of course, and from Liverpool. All these things that have been required for me to have gotten Ringo's drum seat. But, I was sort of on that path. I didn't know really anything about music other than what was on the radio, which was exclusively, rock and roll. There was like 2 or 3 stations on the radio. I think ABC, which was Cousin Brucey, or was it NBC? And that was all rock and roll. And then there was the station my mom listened to, which was sort of the jazz vocal music, Frank Sinatra and that sort of music. And so that's all I knew about. I didn't know orchestral music because it just wasn't played anywhere, but maybe in the classroom. Film music, of course, I heard when I was in the theater, but I didn't pay enough attention to it. I was too Beatles, Byrds, and Beach Boys, and all the rest of them obsessed to pay any attention to film music.
Well, without that background of love in orchestral music, what made you want to do that leap from being a jazz drummer to a composer?
I would say, at some point, pitches started creeping into my head, meaning I started inventing things that weren't just rhythms. Rhythms I could invent from as long as I can remember. I've always had music in my head. But again, I wish I could say when I was, 3 or 4, I was starting to compose, but that's not the case. Rather, I was absorbing what was on the radio and what was around me. And it sort of, I got created a repertoire of stuff that I could recall very easily. So the music that went through my head was not my own, but others. I would say that the thing that kind of changed it for me, it so happened I went to Berklee School of Music in Boston and was studying with a hero. That's when I got into jazz drumming, and I was swinging at that time. And I studied with a guy named Alan Dawson, who was Dave Brubeck's second drummer. And he basically told me after spending a summer with him that he wasn't knocked out by what I had to offer. And that was a game changer, heartbreaking game changer. But it was a blessing in disguise, because right around the same time, as I said, sound started coming into my head. I started inventing my own music in my head. And once that started to happen, the sticks kind of went into the closet. And before I could count to 10, I was writing for whatever was around me at college, which was a jazz band, which I was still playing in, and choral groups. So I wrote for voices because there was always someone who was willing to sing whatever was put in front of them. So I put together choirs and wrote for choirs. That was my beginning. But again, shortly thereafter, I started, focusing on orchestral music, and that blew my mind. And I think the score that changed it for me, or at least the record that changed it for me, was the fantasy film world of Bernard Herrmann, which had his fantasy film scores: The Day the Earth Stood Still, Fahrenheit 451, Journey to the Center of the Earth, Seventh Voyage of Sinbad. And I heard the music and it just absolutely blew my mind. I remember going into the movie theater around the time, and the film The Wind and the Lion was playing. The Wind and the Lion with Sean Connery, scored by Jerry Goldsmith. And I remember having a religious experience, really noticing the music in this movie for the first time and how it played. And there were certain cues that just swept me off my feet. And I remember, walking out of the theater and knowing, this is it. This is the future,
Well, the thing with Goldsmith too that is kind of off your radar up to that time is there's a lushness that comes to his music. And you hadn't played with that kind of a full-bodied, lush score before, had you?
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. Well, actually, when I finally moved out here in 1980, I had never written a single film music cue before. I had it in my head, and when I was at school, at least at North Texas State University, I think it's just called North Texas University now. Or just North Texas University. Okay, when I was there, I got some music played by their concert band through pushing the director to read through something that I'd written. But that was the largest ensemble piece I'd ever written. Again, it wasn't a film music piece. So I had it in my head, I just had never had the opportunity to have it played. So it really wasn't until, I think, my second movie, which was called The Power. It was a low-budget sci-fi thriller because it was kind of that, that allowed me to write for a small orchestra, but nonetheless an orchestra. And that opened up the door for me getting obsessed with wanting to continue to write for orchestras. So,
what did you do that made people say, oh, this guy could be a composer for our film, in those early days when you had nothing behind you to prove that to them?
Right. Well, I was lucky. I went to UCLA, which couldn't have been the more perfect halfway house into the LA community for someone who didn't know a single person here. And I worked on a lot of student movies, and that's where I studied with David Raxon, who wrote the music to Laura, Forever Amber, and The Bad and the Beautiful, among other pictures. He kind of saved me from packing up and going back home. I owe him my life. But I learned, there was only one class in film music that UCLA offered, because I went there to study composition as a grad student. Only one class I ever took on film music was his. It was a year long. So most of what I experienced, this is pre-video. So, how did you learn about film music? You went to the movie theater and you recorded the audio on a tape deck, on a cassette. And so most of my time was spent over at Melnitz Hall working on student films. I scored a student film. My name started getting around. I did a lot of them, and finally one of the students put together a feature for his senior project. I talked him into bringing me on board. That opened up the door for me doing his next movie, which then opened up the door for me getting connected to Roger Corman. Roger Corman.
I've heard of him, yeah.
Yeah, I know. The king, of course, I'm sorry. Yeah, Roger Corman. As you've met, I'm sure you've gone out and surfed with him. But But anyway, I got to work in a Roger Corman movie, which was the place that you went to if you finished up at UCLA and USC. You know, if you were lucky, you got to work for Roger Corman. He was more inclined to hire someone directly out of school, and so I worked for him. And then I got connected to New World Pictures, and I was like the in-house guy for New World Pictures. And again, it was a film called Hellraiser that changed everything.
Right. Now, that was by far not your first horror film. I
It,
have you down as your first horror film being The Dorm That Dripped Blood.
Right, The Dorm That Dripped Blood. That is precisely that film I was mentioning that I did with a gang of wonderful guys who I'm still in contact with.
From school?
Yeah, still. Was my firstborn. It was all of our firstborn, but we were all still students at UCLA when that was put together. Again, there was a small group. The film went through a bunch of different titles. A record came out on the Citadel label, which was a subdivision of Varese, under the name of Pranks, because at the time the record came out, that was the title that the film was going by. It started as Death Dorm, then it went to Pranks, and finally was released after it got picked up by a distributor as The Dorm That Dripped Blood.
What a great title. It sounds very hammerish.
Yes, exactly. It was shot on the UCLA campus, all UCLA actors, UCLA this, UCLA that. And a lot of people connected to that movie have gone on and done pretty damn well.
But then you went on and you had kind of a major horror film with Nightmare on Elm Street 2.
Right. Nightmare on Elm Street 2 was a dream come true. That was the hot picture. Nightmare 1, as you know, was a classic. And to get the opportunity to do 2 was a sign that I was heading in the right direction. Now, my thing was the reason why I think a lot of low budget production companies were interested in getting me on board was because I was the guy who could take a budget for the score that was just putridly small and managed to put together an orchestra. Again, this is pre-home studio, so you couldn't do synth scores. It had to be done with live musicians. And so back in those days, I would get orchestras in rooms for virtually no money. And that was the scene with Nightmare 2. I think one of the reasons why I was hired is because I told them I'd get an orchestra for that movie, for that score, even though they they didn't have the money. I mean, I can't remember what the package on that was, but it was just insanely small. That score was recorded at Mad Hatter, which is no longer around. That was Chick Corea's studio, and they used to tell me that I put more musicians in that room than they'd ever had before, and they ever had after, before it was closed down. I had that stuff like a sardine can, and I remember Robert Shea, who ran the company. I had promised him I'd get him an orchestra of about 30 some odd people. I remember he came to the recording session. The first thing he did was he looked through the glass window that divided the booth from the stage itself. And I watched him count the heads of the musicians. And he turned around and he looked at me and he smiled when he found that there was the same number of musicians there, maybe even more than I had promised him I'd deliver.
Wow. Now, when you went on to Hellraiser and got to work with Clive, and did you have any idea at that time it was going to be different than many of the horror films that had come before it?
The one thing that I didn't know that was going to be different about it was Clive was not planning on hiring me. He was planning on hiring an ambient industrial band called Coil, who were great, who were friends of his. Tony Randall, who was running post-production, the head of post-production at New World, not the actor, but the director who directed the Hellbound, the follow-up, recommended me. Clive hired me based on, I think, on Tony's recommendation. When I met with Clive, he said, "Listen, I'm not looking for scary, shrieky horror music here. Not like what you did on Nightmare. This is a demented, sick love story. Yes, it's a horror film, but behind it all is a tragic love story about a woman who, though she's abused, becomes obsessed with a guy to the degree that she's willing to murder to bring him back into her life, even though she knows he's going to abuse her." So he said, "That's what we have to sell. If we can't sell that, we're in trouble." Did any of us know what was going to? I mean, so that brought a whole new dimension into the few horror films I've done.
But did
Because
you
we had,
feel that on set while you were working, or in the studio, or was it just a horror film you were attacking from another angle, like other horror films?
well, I mean, I again, I was so wanting to hit a home run, and I think I was so motivated back in those days. Well, still to this day, by the anxiety of shit. I better get this right, or I'm screwed. It's a fear of, I think, fear of not delivering. So no, I mean, there was that there. Understood that this was, I mean, it was a love story. It really was. And I fortunately caught that. I must have. I did. I had no idea, as I don't think anyone did, that the film was going to have such a following ultimately.
Quite a lasting impact. Yeah.
Yeah, it has a tremendous lasting impact. It was, and I guess, it turned out to be a great horror film because, all great monster movies and great horror stories, there's always an element of tragedy in it, the misunderstood monster or something that brings the human element in it that in which we sympathize. We have to sympathize with someone. And so I caught on to that through her. As I recall, there's a scene where she's crying when she's having a flashback of what's the name of the bad guy? What's his name? I can't remember the names of the characters. But anyway, yeah. So I remember, I can tell you, I'll just finish this by saying there's one cue in that movie that sort of made me realize, after playing it back, you know what, maybe I really should be a film composer. Because up to that moment, I wasn't sure.
No kidding. And that was not by far your first or second movie.
No, it's not. But you still, what am I doing? What am I bringing that's special? Why am I really connecting to these films? Do I have anything to say? It was the scene again when she has the flashback, where Julie has the flashback, and she remembers Frank, is his name, Frank.
Right.
And she remembers when they met and then them making love, and at the same time, her husband is walking up the stairs with a mattress and he cuts his hand. There's a cue there. And I remember we recorded that. We didn't have the money to project the picture. All we did is we recorded it to click. And so no one could see it against picture. It wasn't until it was transferred to MAG, cut into the picture in an editing room at New World Pictures, in their post-production facility, that I got to see it against the picture for the first time. And I remember there was like dead silence in the room when it was finished. And, Tony was there, the picture editor was there, Clive was there, and we all sort of started crying. I mean, I was crying. I mean, it was just, we hugged each other. We were like, wow, there's something really happening here. And I was stunned. And so I feel extraordinarily blessed that I got a call on that movie. It changed my life. It really did.
Well, and speaking of that, it's interesting because up till that time, you were almost picking films that you could just get. That was the first criteria. But secondly, it was about, having a job, being able to prove yourself, and collecting a check. You've now been doing this for many decades. How has your criteria changed to the way that you pick projects nowadays?
I don't think it's changed one bit, really. You know, they usually pick me. You know, I don't turn down a lot of stuff. I cannot tell why. It's maybe there's directors that are scared to call because they think that I'm too expensive, or you know, or something like that. But that's, you know, no. I you know, I can get excited about someone who's excited about what they've just created. And I always find something in it. Once I'm on board, man, I am with that picture 120% easily. No one can tell me that film's got problems. I don't want to hear it because I don't believe it's got problems. I'm in love with it. So I'm not, you know, I maybe, you know, maybe it's been told that maybe I did too many horror films. I don't know, because there's other sides of my musical personality.
We're pretty glad you did.
Well, I am. I mean, I'm not you know, displeased with any of this. I'm thrilled that it worked out the way it did. I'm the luckiest guy on this planet. But yeah, I pretty much, you know, if a director was excited and was passionate about wanting to be part of his team, I would hug him and get on with it. So I haven't, no, I don't think things have changed that much. I mean, listen, I don't run to slasher movies per se. I'm a big fan of ghost stories. Those have always been my favorite types of films, and my favorite. I have a ton of classic ghost story short stories literature. It's my favorite kind of fiction. So a great ghost story will knock me wild, you know. But I've loved them all. I'm just not saying no to that many people.
Well, you've got the horror thing, the ghost thing. It's actually in your blood because in your private life, you're still involved in that. You go on vacations where you visit the haunted places of wherever it is you're going to vacation. You collect jack-o'-lanterns and that sort of thing. I think there's a bunch of them above your head up there on the shelf.
That's right.
Um, you still have that. You can't do too much of something you love,
Now,
but
you know, I do love it. I don't know where it came from. All I can say is that it's interesting. When I was a kid, in my bedroom, on the left wall in the corner, I had a poster of the Beatles hung, and on the right wall, I had a picture of Bela Lugosi as Dracula. Now, that says a lot, you know. It was sort of an indication, though I didn't know. You know, I was always fascinated, Adele, by, you know, that what we would call the invisible world, the stuff that goes on behind what it is we can see with our own eyes, especially at nighttime. I was always fascinated by what is around the corner at night, and spending a fair amount of time staring out into the sky and trying to imagine what all was going on there. Um, Halloween, of course, was my absolute favorite day of the year because it allowed that part of my personality, which I had to keep pretty quiet because it wasn't viewed as the kind of behavior of someone sane, you know. Um,
how did your parents approach that? Were they aware of your bent?
Yeah, they weren't too keen on it. I mean, my dad was a lawyer. My dad's dad was a lawyer, and so they were very, you know, conservative minded.
Pretty buttoned up type of family.
Yeah, oh yeah, definitely. And so the whole obsession or interest in all those things that were offbeat, dark, weird. You know, I remember going to the Ripley's Believe It or Not museum for the first time and going, "Oh my God, who is this guy?" God, you know, when you're a little kid, you go, "I wish he was my dad," you know, but not. No, you know, it just, no, it wasn't. It was frowned upon. It was kind of frowned upon. They came around, of course, but when I was younger, they were worried, and rightfully so. I was a daydreaming, non-athletic, non-academically inclined guy who would spend most of his classroom hours staring out the window and daydreaming about a variety of things. Like I said, Halloween was the day. Getting ready for Halloween was heaven. The preparation and deciding what I was going to be, getting that costume together. And back in those days, of course, the costume selection was mighty, mighty small. Collegeville
Right.
and Ben, what's Ben's last? Ben Cooper.
Ben Cooper, the mask guy. Yeah.
Yeah, Ben Cooper and Collegeville. That was kind of it. And then Don Post, of course, when he came in with his latex mask, man, that was like I felt like I was in like a real monster when I put those on.
Instead of those plastic things that cut into your eyes.
That's right. They had little slits for your eyes, but they were. I love those too, man. I love them. And my collection of jack-o'-lantern masks. One of my favorite pieces is one of the original Collegeville. There's 2 Collegeville pumpkin jack-o'-lantern costumes that were issued, and I have those original ones. Yeah.
Well, we're getting around the corner to the end of this, but
Oh, shoot.
I'd really like to know, at this point in your career, how do you feel about where you're at? Do you feel like I can rest on my laurels? Do you feel like I have to push harder than ever? Where is your head set?
I think there's one thing you probably discovered that most film composers share, and that is it seems as though it's never enough. There's always something more. I definitely, my musical brain is more vibrant, I think, than ever. And so I'm always wanting to do something to improve that which I am. I'm not ready to rest and say, okay, I'm content with what I've done. I'm always asking myself, what is that next thing I can do to further advance my musical mind? And
Is there
does that make sense?
picture that you haven't done that you'd like to have a shot at?
A picture?
A type of picture, maybe a genre or something that you haven't dabbled in yet?
Of course, everybody wants that great, big Gone with the Wind type movie. You've heard that a million times, the great drama. I've scared a lot of people through my music, and there have been films I've worked on that have caused the audience to cry. And those are great moments too. I love being able to write music that excites the viewer and the listener to react emotionally in big ways. And in horror, of course, you go into the theater. I've been to premieres of movies I've worked on and sat next to a couple that don't know that I wrote the score. And here comes that scary jump scare, and the music hits hard. And I watch them jump out of their seats and scream bloody murder. And I know probably if the music wasn't there, they might not do that. On the other hand, I've been to premieres of dramatic movies or romantic films I've worked on, and a romantic moment comes and I'm sitting next to another couple and I see the woman crying and I go, oh God, that's so wonderful. I'm to know that I've been able to write music that's along with the visuals that's inspired that. So in answer to your question, outside of the great big drama, pretty much right now, I get excited by being a part of a team that is excited about the project they're working on. I know it sounds kind of vague, but I love the team spirit thing of collaborating. And so I'm wanting, to get more involved and more active. Things were kind of slow, and so this is a great new thing I've got going, which is I can't wait to get my teeth into something because this is what I do best. I do scores for movies. I guess that's why I was put on this planet, and so I greatly look forward to continuing to do that. Again, in the scary world, as I mentioned, my favorite kinds of movies are ghost stories. I love the idea of being frightened by something you cannot see rather than something you can see. Usually,
A little more subtle in the horror.
yeah. Well, my favorite horror film, or I call them scary movies of all times, is the black and white uh, original Haunting. You know, The Haunting of Hill House, directed by Robert Wise and based on the Shirley Jackson book of the same title. That movie I see every Halloween. You know, if I'm, usually it's a late night. If I'm going to watch a movie on Halloween late, and it's always that one.
Well, it sounds like for you, it's never really an ending at the end of each project, but the start of a new beginning each time.
Yes, exactly. And I'm always trying to reinvent myself. No one can completely reinvent themselves, but I've never lost that charge of wanting to try to do something I've never done before. Uh, I just refuse to continue to repeat and repeat and repeat consciously, subconsciously, because you got to manufacture so much music so quickly. It's inevitable that you start repeating yourself to a certain degree.
Well, don't give up on it ever, because your fans love you. That is for sure. And we are so happy that you were able to join us and be on the show. Always a pleasure with you, Chris. Thank you. And thank you to David Markland, our producer director. And AJ, thank you back there. I know you're helping put this stuff together. Good to see you. Thanks very much.
I can't thank you enough, Del, for having me a part of your team regularly. I adore you. I adore Sue, as I mentioned at the beginning. By having you guys there as a constant fixture in my life and in all of our lives, it brings so much joy and makes us feel like, unlike I felt like when I was a kid, there's really a community of people who think just like I always did.
There is.
There's an immediate unity. I knew instantly when I walked in, I met you for the first time. I said, great news. He gets me,
That's kind of a scary thought,
No, it's actually a beautiful, scary thought.
Well, so thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me on board.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, my friend.
Bye-bye.